earlier in the episode, you mentioned about a real world implementation of polars, and maybe, as you said, maybe the first ever production instance of polars. And so, am I right in understanding that's Alliander? I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that.
Yeah, Alliander. It's a power grid provider in the Netherlands. Also, they provide the infrastructure for both electricity and gas in a third to a half of the Netherlands, I believe.
So the largest utility company in the Netherlands, therefore, I can't even say Netherlands. That's how bad I am. It's Dutch pronunciation. Nederlands. That's actually easier, isn't that way? Isn't it?
Yeah.
For us, it is.
Oh, that's what you're talking about. I was wondering. What is this country?
Where are these Netherlands?
That ain't no country I ever heard of.
And so tell us about that project and what it was like. And actually, it'd be interesting to know if, when was there overlap in working on the book and working on that project? And did working on a Polars book help with a real world implementation? Anyway, that's kind of an interesting side question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the origin story here is that Thijs and I, we were both very excited about Polars. We were writing a book about it. And then all of a sudden, it became clear that at Alliander, we needed to speed up the pipeline, right? We need to lower cost. We needed to process much more data. And in the current state, that just wasn't possible. It was a combination of not only Python and Pandas, but also R code. So it was very inefficient. To give you an idea, we were running this on a single AWS instance that had over 700 gigs of RAM. 700 gigs of RAM.
Whoa.
And so, we can provide you a link with more backstory to this with some actual numbers. But we were very excited and we were like, hey, let's try this out. Let's do this. At first, the team was very hesitant, right? We're there, 2 people, or 3 actually. We had another colleague, 3 people promoting Polars that is being developed at Xomnia, right? So they were they were very skeptic, understandably. So what we did in order to convince them is to just take on a very small piece of code, right? Some low-hanging fruit, and benchmark it and re-implement the Pandas code into Polars and then just show the numbers. And by then they were immediately convinced, all right, this is indeed way faster, uses way less memory. Let's try this out. Let's take on this huge code base piece by piece by translating, not one-to-one, because you can't do that. You really have to reason about the inputs and the outputs and then do it in an idiomatic way, right? You cannot just translate Pandas to Polars. I think took us, 6 months, a year? I don't even remember. But eventually, I left that client at that time, but there was a moment like, okay, we can now get rid of R and Pandas as a dependency of this project. And it's been running smooth ever since.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think ultimately like the size of jobs at the beginning was about 500 gigabytes for just that task of doing like one calculation, and we shrunk it down, like both being a consequence of implementing Polars, but also as we were rehashing some of the code structure that we were using in the project, we hashed it all the way down from 500 to 40 gigabytes, which makes it a lot more doable to run calculations. Yeah.
And so the second part of your question was like, okay, how did this influence each other? The book writing and putting it into production. And this was, it was a perfect match, because when you're actually need to put it into production, when you have a real problem to solve, that's also when you start to notice the limits, right? Or maybe inconsistencies or missing functionality. For example, there was this random sampling with weights, right? That's something that you can do in Pandas. You just give it another column that indicates the weights for the sampling. That's something, maybe even up until this point, something that Polars doesn't have. Luckily, that was for an ad hoc analysis that we had to do. But at that point, it becomes clear what Polars can and cannot do. Also, when you write, you start to look at things from a little bit of a higher level. So sometimes we noticed inconsistencies in naming or missing methods. Like, hey, why is there no inline operator for the XOR operation? Right? That's something that nobody ever thinks about. But when you need to put in a table in your book and you need to fill in, all the pieces, that's when you start noticing these kind of things. So, we were able to also, submit some issues, maybe even a few pull requests to Polars itself along the way.